Welcome one more day to Space in Armonía. As you know, this is a bilingual channel to know ourselves deeper with the essence of the tree of life, which is actually our true being. And today I'm going to explore the structure of space-time and how that relates with the Sefirotic tree, which is part of the tree of life. And all to answer several questions. People were asking me questions about timelines, the structure of space-time, how we can transcend time. So today we are going to see amazing realizations, which took me many years of experience, pondering. But first of all, we have to distinguish between what we can call creative dimensions of our being and space-time dimensions, which are obviously studied in quantum physics. Actually, we will see perfectly how that correlates with the Sefirotic tree. But before going into that, let's understand that we have a creative ability in ourselves. And when I say creative, I mean innovative. We are able to get out of the mechanical patterns, the repetitive biases and behaviors which are ruled by the mechanicalness of space-time, the tissue of space-time. Every time we feel worn out, it's because of the sense that something is dying off, something is passing. We say the time passes by, but time in itself doesn't exist, and we have in ourselves the ability to connect with the unity of mind, heart, and body, which helps us transcend. But in order for that to take place, we must experience coherence. We must think, feel, and act accordingly. If we act differently to what we think, then we are not in coherence. If we think differently than we feel, then we are not in coherence with our true self. Coherence is a very good concept, which is even used in quantum physics. In that scope, coherence is the relation between two waves or two states of energy which overlap each other without interference. So in the same way, when the mind does not interfere with the heart or the body, then we can feel a unity. We can say, I am. And this is the beginning of the tree of life. We feel I am because there is coherence of mind, heart, and body. Without this, it's impossible to unfold the rest of the qualities. We are going to see 7 in total. That's the first. Then, from I amness, we can develop our will, which have been given by the Holy One. There is no human will apart of the Holy One's will. But many people mistake will with wish. It's not the same. I can say I wish a better house, I wish more money, but that's not will. When I say I will, I mean I firmly want to be myself, to act accordingly to what I really am. So that's the first aspect of will. Then we have another aspect of will, which is the third in the tree of life. It is known as Keter, the crown of life, and is the ability. Will gives us the ability to act with the force. And there is nothing we cannot do developing will. But we must start with I amness, inner coherence, then that strong act of wanting something strongly. I want to be myself. I want to be living the life which is meant for me. And I am able to, because the Holy One gave me all the capacities. But for that we also need conscience and consciousness, which I place between wisdom and understanding in the tree of life. That's the fourth main creative dimension or facet, because conscience tells us what is whole in every act, and true consciousness is an objective kind of consciousness in which subject and object are fused together, so we can see ourselves and the environment at the same time. Actually, some people experiencing near-death experiences report having seen themselves from the outside, in first person, living the events of their life, and even communicating with some conscience inside, which told them something about their life. So it's a three-dimensional experience, if you ponder, because the three persons can be interpreted as three dimensions of consciousness. And this is something I have experienced as well, seeing myself in other timelines. Later on you will see how this is possible. But we have to be able to feel this expansiveness of consciousness here, in this space-time realm. And when I say consciousness, I am also implying self-awareness of our wholeness. So let's move on to the following creative dimension, which is self-recognition. This takes place in Etheric, the beauty, harmonic beauty in the tree of life. And once we are recognizing what we really are, that we are beautiful beings emanated from the Holy One, connected to a human organism, then we can expand. That's the sixth creative dimension. And we can exert influence on everything around, within ourselves, in our mind. If we are in a state of stress, we can bring order and grow. Let our true being of light expand within ourselves. And finally, we realize ourselves in the world. That would be Malkut, the realization of everything we are. But for that we need I amness, the will to want really what we really are, what we must do, what we must live, being able to do with self-awareness, conscience, self-recognition, and expansiveness. Now, once we have the establishment of these 7 central spheres of the tree of life, we can really modify our space-time experience, because everything is shaping itself in accord with our modes of perception. The subject which is measuring is determining the object, and this can be applied to awareness as well. The subject puts the object, is not apart from it, so there is nothing we can see apart from our awareness. Our brain is somehow shaping the way we see the colors, the forms. Subject and object are part of a single movement of perception. So if we change our viewpoint, our perception, we can also change the way we perceive, and therefore we change the object. But this goes very deep, because perceiving is an act that takes place in different dimensions. Actually, in quantum physics, there is a very interesting idea, which is collapsing the wave function. Everything is vibration, everything is waves, but our consciousness is somehow objectualizing those vibrations, turning them into particular objects which seem separate, even though they are connected on many levels. And This is something I not only found in quantum physics, but also in different mysticisms, different ways of approaching the mind. One of those was the view of Shankara. In his work Viveka Chundamani, The Jewel of Discernment, he unveiled the structure of the mind, and he said that everything is an illusion of perception, that causes and effects depend on the structure of the mind, that they don't exist in themselves. So the idea of liberation is also an illusion, because basically we are already free, but the mind complicates everything. And I was precisely studying all that around 2003 when I began to explore the principles of quantum physics. I was coursing the career of philosophy. I wanted to study anthropology, even though in the end I finished the career of philosophy. And one of the subjects I chose was the principles of quantum physics, the philosophy behind quantum mechanics. And it was surprising to see the connections between all this and how many quantum physicists were studying also mystic philosophies. Because obviously both are connected, even though the ways of exploring are completely different. The philosophies are different. We all have a philosophy. Everyone is a philosopher, because everyone makes questions about reality. Now, as I was exploring all these subjects, I came across a very interesting documentary around the year 2009, and it's called Imagining the 10th Dimension. Very interesting. It tries to explain dimensions from a geometrical point of view, and is very intuitive. And ever since I watched that documentary, my mind began to understand more in depth what consciousness is in different dimensions, because I had been exploring that idea from a different point of view, from the point of view of self-awareness, the repetition of timelines. I was obsessed with the idea of the life that repeats itself, how sometimes we have deja vus, we think we have lived something. In many cases because we have, because everything repeats to some extent, but with variations. However, I wanted something more than just a geometrical representation, so I started to imagine several artistic configurations which I learned from nature. You can see some of them here: spirals and imbrications, spider webs. All is telling about the structure of the universe. I realized how the rings of growth in the trees tell about how reality is expanding, integrating everything. I also paid attention to the way our spine is comprised of vertebrae which are united together by means of a cord. So everything is telling about the structure of time. The trees are branching out, just as timelines are branching out. So let's understand all this not just from a geometrical point of view as in imagining the 10th dimension, but also bringing all that in connection with our deep experience. And for that we can use the Sefirotic tree, something which I also discovered in 2009, even though at that time I didn't know very much what it was. Even though years later I realized the connection. Actually, in the video in which I explained the connection between music, the menorah, the enneagram, I already show how the Sefirotic tree can be used as an expression of the three basic dimensions. If we start in Keter, we see the point, which is not a dimension, obviously. It has no longitude, width, or depth. So the first dimension would start with a line, longitude, which we could place between wisdom and understanding, Chokmah and Binah. Then if we add one more dimension, width, by means of becoming more aware, then we have the triangle, mercy, force, and beauty, Chesed, Geburah, Tiferet, which is the middle triangle, the plane, the b-dimensional plane. Then if we add one more dimension, we get the first three-dimensional object, the pyramid, which starts in Netzach, victory, then follows with Od, the splendor of the mind, Yesod, growth, and Malkut, the realization. And now obviously the question is, what about the rest of dimensions? And the key is seeing the first three dimensions as the basis with which we build up the other dimensions. In general, many people think that we live in the third dimension, that all this is three-dimensional, but this is not exactly the case, because everything is moving and the third dimension is not moving. By uniting the first, the second, and the third dimension, then we get movement. If we move a three-dimensional object through a line and through a plane, we get movement. And that movement has a series of sequences, which is actually the fourth dimension. We cannot perceive the fourth dimension fully, but it's operating because everything is moving. Actually, I remember when I was around 12 years old, in a class of physics in the school, the teacher began to push the wall, and he said, even though you don't notice it, the wall is moving. And we started laughing because it was really funny. But he was referring to the movement of subatomic particles. But obviously we only perceive segments of that sequence of events because there is a blind spot in our consciousness. We cannot perceive all the sequences. And this is our tragedy, because we forget about the past. So we forget about our mistakes. And we fall back again into our mistakes because of this forgetfulness. And this is because the fourth dimension is completely causal, deterministic. There is one line of events, and that's it. But in the fifth dimension, there are more possibilities. We can compare the fourth dimension to traveling through a railway. The train goes through several stations, and those are fixed. But suppose that in the middle of the way, because of a problem in the railway, there is a deviation. The train goes in another direction, and the passengers have to find another way to reach their destination. That would be a perfect example of how, from the fourth line of dimension, we can have branches, possibilities, which are the fifth dimension. But obviously these possibilities are limited. The other day I went out to record a video, and I didn't have a very good summary in my mind, even though I knew all this, but it wasn't well structured. And apart from that, when I made the video, I realized that it was not properly recorded, but because the inclination was too heavy, and it only recorded from my nose downwards. Therefore, I could not publish the video, I had to repeat it. But in any case, it wouldn't have been a good video, because the order in which I explained the subjects was not adequate. At least it was not as good as this one. And this means that within a range of possibilities, there is always a limitation. So no matter what we do, we always are going to get to the same results. And this is because in the fifth dimension, we have several possibilities. We can record here, over there, we can do this, we can do that, but always in a limited way. We can see why things happen. I can place myself here because there is no direct sun. I can hold the camera in a definite angle because I know the result, and so on. So I can know why things happen from the fifth dimension, but I cannot change them. The real shift takes place in the sixth dimension, because it doesn't depend on the limited possibilities that we have from the present moment. Imagine that we are in a very bad state, that we are full of traumas, that we are blocked mentally, that we don't know what to do. Obviously, in that state, we have very limited possibilities. There is a limited range of things we can do. The only way of changing is shifting awareness in such a way that we attract a timeline in which the possibilities expand. And this means attracting timelines that are compatible with our timeline because they are similar, but let's say that they are better. Actually, there is an indefinite number of fifth dimensional timelines which are taking place simultaneously. There can be a timeline in which Hitler won the war and established the Third Reich, so the Earth would be completely different. We possibly wouldn't be here because our parents probably didn't meet in that timeline, in case it is real somewhere. And there can be many possibilities, but those are limited, obviously. Obviously, it would be paranoid to make a quantum leap to a timeline in which Hitler established the Third Reich, or something which is completely out of tune with what we are living. So we have to attract something which is in line, but not exactly the same. Actually, there is a very strange phenomenon known as Mandela effect. Some people claim that they remember how Nelson Mandela died in prison, when in this timeline Nelson Mandela didn't die in prison. He actually became a Nobel Prize and died recently. But there can be many examples of that kind. And this means that some fifth dimensional lines are overlapping. They are so similar that we are not perceiving the differences. And this might be taking place more usually than we think. Because if we are changing our perception, we are attracting different possibilities, and we can even attract a sixth dimensional timeline when we expand our consciousness beyond certain range. So from the fifth dimension we can see why things happen, the causes and effects, the causal relation between events, and from the sixth dimension we can change things, we can attract our better version. There can be a timeline in which we are not confused, in which we succeed. So we can only manifest the richness of our true self, taking into consideration the sixth dimension. Now notice how in the sixth dimension all the possibilities belong to this type of universe. There can be a timeline in which the dinosaurs didn't get extinguished, but it's still this type, this version of universe. Now imagine that the initial conditions were completely different. For instance, a universe in which the amount of gravity and mass changed and the result was completely different. Different initial conditions give rise to a different universe, even though it's still ruled by the laws of electromagnetism and so on. Now all the possibilities of different initial conditions would be contained in the seventh dimension. So in the seventh dimension we would have all the sixth dimensional possibilities. And imagine that apart from having different initial conditions, we have completely different laws. A universe in which there is only light, there is no mass, or there is an absence of gravity. Totally different laws. So in this case, we are going beyond the physical experience. And this is precisely the 8th dimension, which contains all the 7th dimensional possibilities. If you notice, dimensions are defined by the previous one. So the 8th dimension contains many 7th dimensional timelines, and this is why scientists distinguish different layers of universes. The multiverse would be the 6th and 7th dimension, and the 8th dimension is known as the Omniverse, the universe which comprises all possible universes, even universes which go beyond the physical reality. I think that 8th dimension would correspond with Beria, the world of edification. As you know, in Kabbalistic teachings, there are 4 basic worlds: the physical world, Asiya; the world of formation, Yetzirah; the world of edification, Beria; and the world of emanation, Atzilut, all comprised within the Absolute, Adam Kadmon, the primordial man. And we can place dimensions across these different planes, and the 8th dimension would correspond, I think, with the world of edification. Even the 9th dimension could be placed in this world of edification, because in the 9th dimension we have no universes, but the building blocks, the ideas, the archetypes, the first conceptions that lead to a universe, even if it's a mental universe. So that would still be part of an edification, the world of Beria. So in this physical world, we experience segments of the 4th dimension, which contain the previous 3 dimensions. Then in the world of formation, we experience the 5th dimension, possibilities, choice, the illusion of free choice, because there is no free choice really. And the 6th dimension also takes place in that world of formation. Then in the world of Beria, we would go from the 7th to the 9th, probably, and beyond space-time dimensions, we would enter the world of Atzilut, emanation. Obviously, we can conceive more dimensions. In quantum mechanics, they think of 11 dimensions or even 22. But in order to make things simple for the moment, let's think this way, because those are the basic dimensions. The 10th dimension is not a dimension because, as we said, everything begins with a point, and the point has no width, depth, or longitude. And reflecting about all this, I recall something Apostle Paul said, that we would come to know the longitude, depth, and width of the universe, because everything is based on the first 3 dimensions. Remember what I explained in the previous video about the Tzimtzum, the contraction, the reduction of frequency of vibration, which opened a space. And in that space there was a fragmentation which gave rise to a space-time. But before space-time came, there was a living, loving awareness full of life. There was movement. So there can be movement beyond time. Actually, as we saw, when we enter in coherence, we end up feeling an expansiveness, a growth, which goes beyond time. We cross space-time, but we don't depend on space-time, because we are immortal beings as part of the tree of life. We are not subject to death. Therefore, we can have all dimensions within ourselves, because we are basically 12-dimensional, coming from the 13th aspect, which is the total sphere. So all this means time does not exist in itself. It's the mind what connects the apparent past with the apparent future, but all is taking place simultaneously, even though we cannot conceive a simultaneous reality because our mind is limited to these sections of the fourth dimension. This is the problem of the human mind, which is limited, is full of blind spots. But as soon as we start becoming aware of all the lines of events, all our actions, then our consciousness expands and we somehow raise in vibration, and we can perceive why things happen in our life. And this is how we transcend space-time, gaining degrees of freedom, our true freedom. Now, to wrap up all this, I suggest pondering on something mentioned by Paul as well. He said, "For now we see darkly as through a glass, but it will come the time in which we will know as we were known." Why? Because the dimensions will expand and we will see ourselves from different perspectives. Not just first person, but also third person and second person. We will be able to talk with ourselves in silence, in conscience. Actually, this is something that can start to take place as we grow within ourselves, obviously experiencing more than just segments of the fourth dimension. Anyway, for now it's enough information. Remember, I left an article in the blog themusicofwisdom.blogspot.com, also known as The Song of Reality. There you have the full essay concerning the previous video. I hope all this information is useful. Thank you very much for listening with attention. Give thumbs up if this was inspiring to you. Subscribe to support the channel. Share the video. Click on the bell if you want to receive weekly notifications. And let's keep cleaning the heart and the mind, opening ourselves for the manifestation of the primordial love and modified life, integral conscience, and deep, blissful serenity.